In the past few weeks, Kamala Harris has taken a lot of the wind out of Donald Trump's sails. Donald Trump has been riding high. He's had a lot of momentum. But now all the news is talking about Kamala Harris. All the news is on her, and he is trying to get some of the focus back. And he's trying to find leverage points, certain policy things that he might be able to splurt out and get attention for and get support for. And so when he was at a rally in Las Vegas a week or two back, he proposed an idea of not taxing tips anymore. If you get tipped, you don't get taxed. And this is a really big deal to say in Nevada, because Nevada has a lot of culinary workers. And these culinary workers, these waiters, the people who work in the casinos of Las Vegas, these people rely on tips. And so Trump is making a bid for their vote by saying, we're not going to tax your tips as a form of income. And this played, like I said, very well with the Culinary Union. But the leadership suggests that a proposal like this is not an actual serious policy. But there's a difference going on. Because while the Culinary Union leadership is calling it not serious policy, there is absolutely a groundswell of people within the Culinary Union, the members themselves, who say, oh, I don't want my tips taxed. And they get intrigued by that, and they're starting to like a lot of that. Now, the Culinary Union has been fighting specifically to raise the service minimum wage up to the standard minimum wage. If you ever worked a restaurant job as a waiter, you know that the minimum wage for a waiter is very different from the minimum wage of any other worker, right? I think the minimum wage in our state is like $3 for a waiter, something like that. And so they rely on the tips. And so they are pushing for the Nevada delegation and city council members and everyone else to try to raise that minimum wage up. But Donald Trump says, no, we're going to do it a different way. We're just not going to tax your tips. Without any other information, how do you feel about this type of policy? What's your first instinct? Why do you think Trump came to this?
So a couple questions come to my mind. How much revenue do we get from taxes on tips?
Okay, good.
But besides that, like, how many rich people would this help? And my inclination is like probably not that many. Maybe that's wrong, but
those are good thoughts, though.
Yeah, if it doesn't help that many rich people, I'm usually, and if it doesn't remove too much revenue from our government system, then I'm usually happy with putting more money back into the pockets of people who are on the lower end of the economic spectrum.
Totally. So that was my initial reaction at first. And it was like, how much revenue do we actually get? Apparently it's about like $30 billion. $30 billion isn't chump change. $30 billion, that's like free college for the United States. No, it's not. $100 billion.
$30 billion is
$100 billion is free college for the United States. It's not $30 billion, but $30 billion is enough.
It's something. It's less than 1% of our overall tax revenue, but it's over 0.1%.
Right. It's significant.
It's not insignificant.
It's not insignificant. So, but as Trump does, he blurts out this very blatant and just, not fleshed out idea. And other Republicans actually came together and actually tried to fill in the gaps. And so Senator Ted Cruz and Representative Byron Donalds from Texas and Florida, respectively, have wrote up the No Tax on Tips Act. And as the bill is written, it shows a lot of the flaws with this type of proposal. Okay. First off, the proposal has no guardrails for it being abused by high-income professionals like hedge fund managers. And so, like, if a hedge fund manager is running your portfolio for you, instead of simply taking a percentage of the revenue of the investments, he could simply change his income stream model to say, tip me this amount from each of your gains. And then you wouldn't have to pay taxes on that.
So, see, I'm skeptical that there wouldn't be some enforcement mechanism here to say this is only money that people could choose to give you or to not give you for this service. Like I'm assuming that whatever is proposed in this legislation says this is like it distinguishes a tip from another source of payment, right?
Well, what I'm saying is the bill blatantly does not exclude hedge fund managers from changing their way to converting their income from this into tips.
I hear what you're saying, but I think you're saying more that this bill does not exclude it from being a hedge fund manager. But they would still need to start making this money as a tip.
Yes, which they would still need to make it as a tip.
That it would need to be voluntarily given to them with the option of not giving it to them.
Right.
Yes.
But then obviously if it's not given to them, they won't do business with them.
But that again, doesn't that, I think that means it's not a tip. Like, and I would assume the legislation accounts for that. Anyways, I do think it's a problem for, like, say someone does want to tip their hedge fund manager. I want that to be taxed.
Right.
Like in addition to whatever the initial payment is.
Right.
But I do, again, always wanting to give credit where credit is due.
Yeah.
I don't assume that anyone could just now say, like if you go to get a haircut and like they're like, the haircut is $25. I don't think that they could write that off as a tip.
No, it would have to be framed as a tip. But like an example could be an Amazon delivery driver.
Sure.
Okay. Amazon delivery driver, you have to sign on a piece of, you have to sign to get your package. Okay. You go to get the package and the guy holds out his thing in front of you and it says, you know, a tip thing. And that could happen because the Amazon could change its structure to have it be a service job and then have the worker rely on tips, and then the incentive for the person themselves, the driver, could be, oh, I won't get taxed on these tips. And then it could be a whole incentive where all that would happen in respect is just a bunch of different jobs would just move to tip jobs because it means people get to keep more of their money.
Okay.
If you didn't tax tips, there would be no reason to not have a tip job.
So you're saying, okay, the jobs would be tip jobs because instead of the government taking the chunk, the company that employs the person would take the chunk.
Well, no one would take the chunk.
Except for the person who delivered it?
What do you mean? There would be no taken out. You would keep all your money.
Yeah. So then why, but then if that's the case, why would Amazon, for example, change it to a tip like service, like for the Amazon driver?
Right. Because that way they wouldn't have to directly pay the employee anything, and the person would have to be reliant on the customer's goodwill for the tipping.
Okay, but I don't think they would accept that. Do you? Do you think people would?
Well, what I'm saying is some people could absolutely accept that. If you tell people, think about all these people now who are in this culinary union who think no tax on tips is a good idea. It obviously isn't. The right response is to move the minimum wage up to standard minimum wage, so you get a correct amount of money, a reliable amount of money for your labor.
What I'm saying is I feel like there's another market force here, which is that people tip for what they think is the thing they're supposed to tip for. So I feel like the idea that these jobs could just feasibly shift into tip-only jobs and they would actually sustain people, and like Amazon delivery drivers wouldn't be skeptical of changing their jobs to tip-only jobs because people aren't used to tipping their Amazon driver. I think there would be more friction there than you're giving it credit for.
There might be more friction there, but what I'm saying is that this policy is stupid because it doesn't account for that obvious thing that could happen. Like there would be no reason for you could. How am I trying to put this? There would be no incentive for somebody to not know because you have security for not working a tip job. My point is that what this just does is it encourages more tipped industries than non-tipped industries, because more tipped industries would get to have the business have less overhead in their daily operations.
Yes.
And the person, the worker on the other end would feel that, oh, I don't get tipped on these amount of tips that I get. I'm actually going to be walking away with more money, even if that may not be the case. But since they're not going to be paying any taxes, that might not be beneficial for them in the long run.
Okay, where my mind goes when you describe it that way is the danger of wanting to turn all of these industries into tipped industries. Generally, I don't think it'll be a problem, because even now, like, people have already gotten tired of tips. The New York Times ran many articles about tipflation like last month. When you go to a coffee shop and you're asked to tip the person who checked you out at the cash register, everybody's kind of rolling their eyes, and I don't know, I always pressed 0 because they didn't actually do anything to serve me. They just talked to me at the cash register. I think the more you do that, the more you risk eating into the tips of the jobs that actually depend on it.
And I do agree with that.
My scary thing would be, like, if you did something like this and tipping became the thing everywhere, make sure that you line up that culinary worker minimum wage with the overall minimum wage.
Yes, and so the Culinary Workers Union, their statement is explicitly that they endorse a federal ban on sub-minimum wage workers and ensures no tax on tips. They want a dual approach to it.
Sure. Makes sense.
The other portion of this bill that I think is hilarious is that it actually doesn't provide any relief for tipped workers at the bottom of the economic spectrum, because the majority of people at the bottom of the economic spectrum don't pay income taxes anyway. You'd only start paying income taxes once you make over $28,000.
Because of the standard deduction.
More than that, because your rate is zero for your first $28,000.
Is that true?
Yep.
Okay.
You have a 0% tax rate in your first $28,000 that you earn. So, as a married couple. So, if this married couple makes $28,000, okay, or an example, if they make
Dude, I don't think that's true. I think
true.
it's 10% on the lowest bracket.
No, I'm pretty sure that there is a bracket of specifically zero federal taxes.
It's only the deduction. The standard deduction is what creates a zero, because you can, like, there's a $14,600 standard deduction for filers.
Let me make
But
sure.
I mean, it's effectively the same thing. It's effectively that you get that taken off.
Right.
But generally, besides that.
Okay. So yes, they don't pay any income taxes now because of the standard deduction.
Sure.
Okay. And then if you don't tax their tips, then they obviously still don't get that.
Sure.
Another example here is if the child tax credit as designed by the current government, it gives about $2,000 per child. I'm sorry, $1,700 per child. But it only goes into effect if the family pays income taxes, because again, you have to do a tax return. Okay. So if you're not doing a tax return, you don't get the child tax credit. So in effect, a single parent with one child who earns about $24,000 annually, $5,000 from wages and $19,000 from tips, their initial $210 tax cut would be completely wiped away by the reduction in their child tax credit from $1,910 to $1,700 because of the limit of the CTC's refundability. So you're actually ending up losing money with the current formulation of the child tax credit for this low-wage single mother. And this goes across a lot of the economic spectrum as well. If we look at how the Democrats propose lowering taxes, the main way the Democrats want to do it is by restoring the American Rescue Plan version of the child tax credit and then expanding the earned income tax credit. So an example is a single parent with one child, $5,000 in wages, $19,000 in tips. Under the No Tax on Tips Act, you would get $0 in benefit. Under the Democrat proposed plan, you would get $1,090 in benefit. If we look at a married couple with two children, $20,000 with wages, $20,000 in tips, the tax cut under the No Tax on Tips Act, you get $480 in benefit. But with the Democrats' proposed plan of the earned income tax credit expansion and the child tax credit expansion, you would get $2,600 in tax relief. So there's a big difference. But the no tax on tip thing just sounds really good. And the soundbite is what Trump is going for. And I think it, unfortunately, could be very effective.